Now, here's the thing that I think Sara and I can agree on is that even if they violated the rule and didn't provide the names and addresses as required, the judge is still going to allow a last-minute alibi witness in the interest of justice. The tie always goes to the defendant and then some.
Interesting. Yeah.
I also think at one point, I also think the way that I read it was that what Ann Taylor's saying is that had you given us the opportunity to prelim to cross-examine your witnesses, we could potentially corroborate that he was driving around. I read it to mean not necessarily that the defense will bring in new witnesses, but that in the process of the trial and cross-examination, they might be able to corroborate this quote unquote alibi.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Sara. You could tell that the defense was annoyed that they didn't get the preliminary hearing. I mean, they thought they were going to get the prelim. There was a secret grand jury happening that no one knew about. I want to read this part that you referred to, Sara. It says, corroboration of Bryan Kohberger not being at 1122 King may be brought out through cross-examination of the state's witnesses. At this time, Mr. Kohberger cannot be more specific about the possible witnesses and exactly what they will say. Had the state moved forward with the preliminary hearing, the defense would have had the opportunity to develop testimony through cross-examination and witness presentation. So, I mean, I get that they're annoyed, Sara, but I mean, that's not the way the law works, right? I mean, the prosecution had an opportunity to the grand jury, and that's what they did. So, like, why even say that in the document?
Well, yeah, and that part of her pleading was a little bit like wah wah.
Yeah, wah wah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, Dave knows this. It's absolutely the state's choice whether to go by grand jury to establish probable cause or do a preliminary hearing, and they chose to go by grand jury. And I always said, why aren't they doing that? When are they going to do that? You know, so it was absolutely their choice. But I think the defense is annoyed altogether that you are delaying discovery, you are trying to take a peek into essentially our work product to find out who was corroborating witnesses are for alibi, and you're trying to violate his sacrosanct right to a speedy trial that he doesn't want to waive. And so sit this one out, you know, prosecutor. And that's really what she's saying. She's kind of like, fine, he was driving around, leave us alone.
Yeah,
that's how
when you mentioned the wah-wah attitude, I mean, with a lot of her filings, I don't know if this is just because there's a gag order, but it's almost like she tries to sort of like paint a picture of the vibe right now, or what she's annoyed about, or what she wants people to know. Do you know what I mean? Have you gotten that sense, Dave, a little bit? Like, or is that just, does this all look normal to you?
Oh, she's mad at the prosecutors because they gave her false hope. For a while, the prosecutors were going to go through with the preliminary hearing, and Sara and I were like, why? And then, as if they were waiting for her to reach for that dollar bill on the ground, they snatched it away at the last minute. And I think that's what she's upset about, was because the prosecutors always had this ability just to go to a secret grand jury, but they were not going to do so until late after she had prepared for the preliminary hearing. So she's going to try to make life a little miserable for the state now. Yeah,
I guess that would be annoying if you prepared for that preliminary hearing and then you find out that that was kind of a waste of time. Sara, do you think that he was driving around, this new alibi that's come out, he was driving around? Is that it? I mean, is there going to be more to this when we see a trial, or is this what we should expect? Like, this is what they're going to say, he was just out for this night drive?
I mean, look, it's really nice to be able to stick to a theory of the defense all the way from the beginning through trial. What's important is that at trial, you need to pick a theory and stick to it. But up until trial, it's, you know, you can throw things at the wall and see what sticks. You might say things because you're under pressure like she is to just, you know, get them to back off a little bit. I don't think it's wise because we're all, you know, all eyes are on this case and we're trying to read into every document that is posted on the court's website. And now she's saying he was driving. But look, it's possible, you know, I think these two college towns, there was a definite relationship, egress, ingress between these, you know, these towns. He lived in that town. And so these college students were socializing back and forth. I don't think it's unusual that he was driving around. It doesn't, you know, it's not like he just decided he can't sleep and started driving around. We don't know where he was driving from, where he was going. Right. It's very vague, right? So she's leaving room to be able to explain this further and flesh it out further. That's how I read it.
Dave, if you were the prosecutor on this case, I mean, is there anything that would have you worried at this point? Is there anything that stands out to you where you'd be saying, and again, there's a lot we don't know, but from just what we know, where you'd be telling your team, look, I think we've got an issue with this?
No, there was the one witness inside the home, a surviving roommate who supposedly had exculpatory evidence, meaning evidence that could lend towards Kohberger's innocence. And that's why they wanted her to testify at the preliminary hearing. And she didn't want to testify for various reasons. I think that was a fabrication in the press. I don't think she really has that kind of evidence that would clear Kohberger. But that's the only thing I've seen so far that if it did exist, that could create reasonable doubt. Otherwise, I think that they got this guy dead to rights.
It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Dave, what about the 3 unknown male DNA profiles at the scene? What about the fact that it was a party house? What about the fact that 8 hours later the police were called and the house was clean? What about the fact that there was...
Well, you say it was a party house. Wouldn't that explain all the DNA, though? There's probably all sorts of DNA profiles there. His DNA was on the knife sheath.
But that's touch DNA. So that's problematic. Dave knows that. And then there was the one-legged situation with the one latent footprint. I mean, what is that? Like, was somebody hopping around? I mean, I see a lot of problems, but those problems can be a wash as we learn more in this case. If there's more evidence that's reliable, that will withstand the testing in court, then I think we can have a better conversation. But right now I see a lot of problems. I see a lot of holes.
Well, I think it's a good point you make that we don't have a lot of the information. So it's hard. You can only discuss this so far without knowing everything that they know. Sara, Azari, Dave Aronberg, you both are the greatest. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.